What would you do if your hands betrayed you in the one job that required perfect steadiness? Staff Sergeant Jessica Blake faced this reality every day as the weapons maintenance specialist for Delta Force. The operators treated her with polite pity, assuming her shaking hands were the result of some unfortunate accident. They had no idea they were watching the fastest weapons assembler in military history, and she was about to prove it blindfolded. Welcome to Hidden Heroes. Before we begin this incredible story of a woman whose shaking hands became her greatest strength, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. These are the heroes hiding in plain sight. Fort Braxton's specialized armory hummed with quiet efficiency as Delta Force prepared for their quarterly weapons inspection. The elite operators moved through their equipment checks with practiced precision, each one a study in lethal competence. In the corner, Staff Sergeant Jessica Blake worked at her maintenance station, her hands trembling visibly as she cleaned a Barrett M82 sniper rifle. "Jesus, Blake," muttered Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, watching her struggle to grip a T-30 Torx wrench. "You sure you should be handling the heavy stuff with those shakes?" Jessica didn't look up from her work. "I'm fine, Sergeant. Just a medical condition." The tremors had started 3 years ago, shortly after her deployment to Syria. Essential tremor, the doctors called it. A neurological condition that made her hands shake uncontrollably, especially when she was trying to perform precise tasks. For most people, it would be an inconvenience. For a weapons maintenance specialist in the world's most elite special operations unit, it should have been career-ending. Should have been. Master Sergeant Torres approached her station, clipboard in hand. His weathered face carried the expression of someone who'd seen too many soldiers broken by circumstances beyond their control. "Blake, I need you to prep 12 Barrett systems for inspection. Inspector General's coming next week." "Roger that, Master Sergeant." Jessica's voice was steady even as her hands shook while reaching for the weapon components. Torres watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable. 3 years ago, Jessica Blake had been the fastest weapons assembler he'd ever seen. She could break down and rebuild any rifle system in the Army's inventory faster than operators with decades of experience. Then came Syria, and everything changed. Across the armory, the Delta operators continued their preparations. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were the tip of the spear, operators who could infiltrate enemy territory and eliminate high-value targets with surgical precision. They demanded perfection from their equipment, and that perfection depended on specialists like Jessica. "Hey, Blake!" called out Operator Johnson, a massive man with arms covered in tactical tattoos. "Think you can handle my rifle without dropping it?" A few operators chuckled. It wasn't malicious, just the casual ribbing that passed for humor among warriors who'd seen too much death. But Jessica felt each comment like a physical blow. She'd been the top of her class at the Army's Small Arms Repair School. Her instructors had called her hands magic, capable of diagnosing problems by touch alone and rebuilding weapons with impossible speed. Now those same hands betrayed her every day. "Johnson, that's enough," Torres warned. But the damage was done. Jessica could feel their eyes on her, watching her trembling fingers struggle with tasks that should have been second nature. Captain Hayes, the unit's commanding officer, entered the armory for his daily inspection. His presence immediately commanded respect. A decorated operator with 17 years in special operations, he had earned his position through blood and competence. "Status report, Torres," Hayes commanded. "All weapon systems operational, sir." "Blake's prepping the Barrett rifles for next week's inspection." Hayes observed Jessica's workstation, noting the tremor in her hands as she attempted to install a bolt carrier group. "Blake, how are you managing with the precision work?" Jessica straightened, forcing her voice to remain steady. "No problems, sir. All systems will be ready for inspection." Hayes nodded, but didn't look convinced. Jessica could read the concern in his eyes, the same look every superior had given her since the tremors started, the look that said her time was running out. That afternoon, during routine training, the operators were discussing the upcoming inspection. Inspector General visits were notorious for their zero-tolerance approach to equipment failures. Every weapon had to be perfect, every component functioning flawlessly. "Think Blake can handle 12 Barrett systems?" Rodriguez asked quietly. "She's been struggling with basic maintenance," replied Johnson. "Those rifles have 119 individual components each. One mistake and we all look bad." Operator Stevens, a sniper with 8 confirmed kills beyond 1,500 meters, shook his head. I've seen her work. The tremors are getting worse. Maybe it's time for a transfer to a less demanding position." Unknown to them, Jessica stood just outside the door, listening to every word. Her hands clenched into fists, the tremors momentarily stilled by anger and determination. She'd sacrificed everything for the army. Her marriage had failed during her third deployment. She'd missed her daughter's birthday parties, school plays, and graduation. She'd given 12 years of her life to perfecting her craft, becoming the best weapons specialist in the special operations community. And now they wanted to discard her because of something beyond her control. That evening, Jessica remained in the armory long after everyone else had gone home. She worked alone with the Barrett systems, her hands shaking as she disassembled and reassembled each rifle. Every movement was a struggle, every component a challenge to her deteriorating motor control. But something strange happened as she worked. During moments of intense concentration, when her entire focus narrowed to the task at hand, the tremors would lessen, not disappear entirely, but diminish enough for her muscle memory to take over. She discovered this phenomenon months ago, but had never mentioned it to anyone. In high-stress situations, when adrenaline flooded her system and her mind achieved a state of perfect focus, her hands would steady. It was as if the same neurological pathways that caused her tremors could be overridden by intense concentration and practice. Jessica worked until 0300 hours, disassembling and rebuilding the same Barrett rifle dozens of times. Each repetition burned the process deeper into her muscle memory until she could perform the task with her eyes closed. The next morning brought unwelcome news. Captain Hayes called her into his office, his expression grim. "Blake, I've been reviewing your medical records with the unit surgeon. Dr. Martinez thinks it might be time to consider a medical board review." Jessica's heart sank. A medical board could mean the end of her career, a forced retirement with reduced benefits. "Sir, I can still perform my duties. The weapons are getting maintained to standard." "I know you're trying, Blake. But the unit needs specialists who can work under pressure without physical limitations. The Inspector General inspection is just the beginning. We have a deployment coming up in 6 months. Give me a chance to prove myself, sir." "One chance." Hayes studied her for a long moment. "What did you have in mind?" "A practical test. Let me demonstrate my capabilities in front of the operators. If I can't perform to standard, I'll accept the medical board review." Hayes leaned back in his chair. "What kind of test?" Jessica took a deep breath. "Blindfolded weapon assembly, Barrett M82 system. If I can complete it faster than any of your operators, I stay. If not, I'll request transfer to a non-critical position." "Blindfolded?" Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Blake, even healthy operators struggle with blindfolded assembly. With your condition, that's the point, sir. If I can do this despite my limitations, it proves I'm still capable of supporting the unit." Hayes was quiet for several minutes. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Blake, but this is your one shot. If you fail, we proceed with the medical board." "Understood, sir. I'll set it up for tomorrow afternoon. The entire unit will be present." That evening, Jessica practiced obsessively. She disassembled and reassembled the Barrett system hundreds of times, each repetition faster than the last. Her hands shook constantly, but during moments of perfect concentration, the tremors would fade just enough for her muscle memory to take control. She discovered something the doctors hadn't told her. Essential tremor could be temporarily suppressed by intense focus and familiar motor patterns. It was a neurological quirk that few people knew about, and fewer still could exploit. The next afternoon, the entire Delta Force unit gathered in the armory. Word had spread about Blake's challenge, and operators who rarely showed interest in maintenance procedures were now curious to see what would happen. Captain Hayes addressed the assembled soldiers. "Today, Staff Sergeant Blake has requested to demonstrate her continued capability as our weapons specialist. She'll be performing a blindfolded assembly of a Barrett M82 system." Murmurs rippled through the group. Several operators exchanged skeptical glances. "The current unit record for blindfolded Barrett assembly is 4 minutes and 37 seconds, held by Master Sergeant Torres. Blake believes she can beat that time despite her medical condition." Master Sergeant Torres stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, I've been assembling weapons for 22 years. That record took me 6 months of practice to achieve." "I understand, Torres. This is Blake's choice." Jessica moved to the center of the armory, where a completely disassembled Barrett M82 lay spread across a maintenance mat. All 119 components were arranged randomly, not in the organized fashion she was used to. The upper receiver complete, bolt carrier group complete, lower receiver complete, and magazine system were scattered among smaller parts like the barrel stop, front barrel bushing, sear mechanism, and transfer bar assembly. "The rules are simple," Hayes announced. "Complete assembly of the weapon system. All components must be properly installed and torqued to specification. Blake will be blindfolded and cannot ask for assistance." Johnson stepped forward with a tactical blindfold. "You sure about this, Blake?" No shame in backing out. Jessica's hands were trembling violently, but her voice remained steady. "I'm ready." The blindfold went on, plunging her into darkness. The armory fell silent except for the hum of ventilation systems and the distant sound of training exercises outside. Jessica took a deep breath, forcing her mind into the focused state she'd practiced. The tremors were there, as always, but she pushed them to the background. Her hands moved to the scattered components, fingers identifying parts by touch alone. "Time starts now," Hayes announced. Jessica's hands flew across the maintenance mat with impossible speed. Her fingers found the upper receiver, then the bolt carrier group, each component identified instantly by weight, texture, and shape. The tremors that had plagued her for 3 years seemed to disappear as muscle memory took control. The assembled operators watched in stunned silence as Jessica's shaking hands moved with fluid precision. She installed the barrel stop, aligned the front barrel bushing, and began the complex process of mating the upper and lower receivers. "Holy shit," whispered Rodriguez. "Look at her hands." The tremors were still there, but they seemed synchronized with her movements now, as if the shaking had become part of her technique rather than an impediment to it. Jessica worked with mechanical precision, her fingers finding each component without hesitation. The sear mechanism slid into place with a soft click. The transfer bar assembly followed. Her hands moved to the barrel spring screws, torquing them to specification by feel alone. 2 minutes, Torres called out, disbelief evident in his voice. The bolt carrier group went together like pieces of a familiar puzzle. Jessica's fingers danced across the accelerator mechanisms, firing pin extension and mid-lock pins. Every movement was economical, precise, perfect. 90 seconds, Hayes announced. Jessica was now working faster than seemed humanly possible. Her trembling hands assembled the complex locking mechanisms with impossible speed. The operators pressed closer, watching her fingers work magic they'd never seen before. 60 seconds. The magazine system snapped into place. Jessica's hands found the rear lock pins, aligned them perfectly, and drove them home with practiced efficiency. The muzzle brake was the final component, requiring precise torque to 88 to 95 inch-pounds. 30 seconds. Jessica's fingers found the torque wrench by touch, set the proper specification, and completed the final assembly step. Her hands moved away from the weapon, and she stood straight. Time. 12 seconds, Hayes shouted, his voice cracking with amazement. The armory erupted in chaos. Operators who had doubted Jessica's abilities now stared in absolute shock. 12 seconds for a complete Barrett M82 assembly, blindfolded, was beyond anything they'd thought possible. Johnson stepped forward and removed Jessica's blindfold. Her hands were shaking again, the tremors returning as her intense focus relaxed, but the weapon before her was perfectly assembled. Torres approached with his testing equipment, checking every component, every torque specification, every alignment. After several minutes of inspection, he looked up with wonder in his eyes. Perfect assembly, every specification met, every component properly installed. He paused, shaking his head. In 22 years, I've never seen anything like that. The operators surrounded Jessica, their earlier skepticism replaced by genuine respect. These were men who appreciated excellence in all its forms, and they'd just witnessed something extraordinary. Captain Hayes stepped forward. "Blake, that was the most impressive demonstration of technical skill I've seen in my career. The medical board review is canceled. You're staying exactly where you are." Operator Stevens, the unit's top sniper, approached Jessica with new respect in his eyes. "Blake, I owe you an apology. I thought the tremors made you a liability. I was wrong." "The tremors are still there," Jessica replied honestly, "but I've learned to work with them instead of fighting against them." "How?" Torres asked. "How did you do that so fast?" Jessica smiled for the first time in months. "Practice. 3 years of practice. When you can't rely on steady hands, you have to rely on perfect muscle memory. I've disassembled and rebuilt that weapon system 10,000 times. My hands may shake, but my knowledge is solid. Master Sergeant Torres extended his hand. Blake, I've been wrong about you. Your record is now 12 seconds. I don't think anyone will ever beat that. As the crowd dispersed, Captain Hayes approached Jessica privately. I have to ask, was that a one-time performance, or can you maintain that level of skill? Jessica's hands were trembling again, but her confidence was unshakable. Sir, give me any weapon system in our inventory. Blindfolded or not, shaking hands or steady, I'll have it combat-ready faster than anyone else in this unit. I believe you, Hayes replied. And Blake, the deployment in 6 months? You're going. The unit needs specialists who can perform miracles under pressure. 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Jessica Blake deployed with Delta Force to Eastern Europe. Her trembling hands had become legendary within the special operations community, not as a limitation, but as proof that true expertise transcends physical challenges. In the field, when weapons malfunctioned under fire, when critical equipment failed at the worst possible moment, when operators needed miracles performed in impossible timeframes, they called for Blake. Her shaking hands could fix anything, rebuild anything, adapt anything to keep the mission moving forward. She'd learned the most important lesson of her military career. Sometimes what makes you different is exactly what makes you indispensable. The tremors never went away. But they no longer defined her. Instead, they became part of her signature, the shaking hands that could perform mechanical miracles no steady hands could match. And whenever young soldiers faced their own physical challenges, their own moments of doubt about whether they belonged in elite units, their instructors would tell them about Staff Sergeant Jessica Blake, the woman whose greatest weakness became her greatest strength. These are the heroes hiding in plain sight, the ones who prove that excellence isn't about perfection, it's about finding ways to be extraordinary despite our challenges.